Hey all, welcome to Sversity. Sversity is a learning service from Koyya Enterprises. And this session is part of the MERN learning path, where we cover the fundamentals of front-end development. And here we quickly review HTML. The agenda for the session include a brief history of HTML. We look at the basics of HTML, the general document structure. We try to understand the HTML elements, the head section and the body section, and we look at a few illustrations. And we can pick up some assignments, which you can do on your own. And finally, the summary and next steps. So HTML is created by Tim Berners-Lee at CERN, the European CERN labs. In fact, he treated HTML as an application of SGML. It was another markup. It was actually the mother of all the markup languages. Tim developed a browser as well as a server to try out how or to see how this HTML is working. After several trial and error, finally it was made public in 1993. And since then, the journey dotted with various extensions to HTML in the form of XHTML, which is XML based, DHTML with HTML with the dynamic elements and etc. In 2008, a major milestone happened that is now known as HTML5. The fifth version of HTML was released at that time by the World Wide Web Consortium, WWW. And it retired, even though it is a major milestone and it is still being used very popularly. It was actually retired in 2021. Now, if you ask me what is the current version of our current release of our current version of HTML, we do not have numbering system now because it is now made a living standard. It is continuously evolving. It is maintained by that WHATWG group. It stands for Web Hypertext Replication Technology Working Group. And this group is comprised of Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Mozilla Corporation. To know the actual specifications of HTML, this is the link which can help us. Okay, this is brief history. And if we look at the basics, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So let's decipher that. A language is for communicating between two parties. And HTML is not a general purpose language, rather it is a markup language. Markup language is not even a programming language also. It is not meant for any computational logic, rather it just only gives markups. Somebody else will have to interpret those markups and do something about them. And this HTML is a standard for structuring the web content. Essentially, why this markup language is built? It is to structure the content on the World Wide Web. Instead of just having it as a plain text, HTML gives us some structure. That way, it is easy for us to write the documents and interoperate. In a way, we can say like, we can bring in some kind of a standard presentation. This particular HTML prefers semantics over presentation. Right? HTML do not really worry about the presentation logic. It only talks about the semantics. It only worries about the semantics. Somebody will have to interpret the semantics and present the way they want. And to add some behavior, we can embed scripts, the JavaScript, you know, right? Scripts and etc. And to add the presentational look and feel, we can use something called styling, which we will be seeing in the later sessions. Fine, somebody has written a web content based on this HTML markup. Then what? This document, we call these things as HTML documents once you write those things. And they will be rendered by the so-called web browsers, you know, Chrome browser, Firefox browser, and etc. So what they actually render, what they display on the screen is essentially based on the content that is written in the HTML format. The HTML document can be placed on the local storage where your browser is running so that it can pick up from the file system and render it onto the screen. Or you can place the HTML document on a web server on a remote machine, and the browser on your machine can connect to the server over the network and transfer the content to the local machine and then render it onto the screen. Either way is fine. But most likely, what is the general way? The second way, you keep the web content in web servers, and your web browsers connect to the servers and get the content and render it by interpreting those markups. A HTML document, when we say like, okay, we write a lot of content using HTML, but what that document really consists of? It consists of anything like what you say, like paragraphs, links, headings, and etc. You can also have images and other multimedia objects like video, audio, and etc. And very interestingly, you can also have forms to interact, right? You can fill up the forms. You see login screens and order forms and etc. Right? You can embed all these things within the HTML documents. So the general structure, when you are a HTML document developer, you'll be following this structure. You see the upper portion, which is in a different font, right? This font we'll be using to represent the code or whatever you write as program or markup or whatever. So this content, as you can see, first you have something called doc type declaration. Then you have the element called HTML. You see those elements are embedded within those less than and greater than brackets, and you should not leave spaces anywhere in between. So HTML is an element, head is an element, body is an element. The general structure is like you will be having the doc type declaration as the top element, followed by HTML. In HTML, you will be having head and body. Within the head and within the body, you will be writing a lot of stuff, which we'll see very shortly. Once you write this document, you save it in a file, right? Typically, the file names ends with .either HTML or .htm. The specific declaration like doc type HTML signals the browser that you are actually following HTML5 structure. As I mentioned, HTML5 is a major release, right? The way we used to write HTML documents before HTML5 and after HTML5 was significantly different. So to tell the browser that we are actually following HTML5 version, we give this declaration. That is a top line in any HTML document. Make sure that you always follow that practice. Since every other element is being part of the HTML element, we call HTML as the root element. The first child of HTML tends to be head element. It consists of data about the web page. It is nothing to display anything, but rather it will give some data to the browser that how to or some other information with respect to this document, which browsers make use of. And the body section is the one which contains the real content, the content that you and me see on the screen. Now let us look at what these elements are. As I mentioned already, a HTML element consisting of an opening tag, the content, and closing tag. For example, if you see H1 is the opening tag and slash H1 is the closing tag, and in between you have the content, that is hello world. Always HTML elements follow this practice. You will start with an opening tag and then the actual content, which may be containing again a lot of other elements also. In this case, it is simple text hello world, followed by finally you need to close it. The opening tag and closing tag are exactly same, except that in the closing tag you will be having a / prefixed. Tags are always written in lowercase. Make sure that you are writing the tags in the lowercase, even though HTML is not very particular about it. Sooner or later, you will be using different frameworks like React, JS, etc. And they treat these elements or the tags which are in the uppercase letter differently from that of the elements that are in the lowercase. So make sure that you always follow lowercase when you are writing the HTML tags. There are some tags which do not contain any content at all. They have just only opening tag and closing tag. It's a simple markup. It is we call them as unary elements. To save some time, you can actually avoid opening and closing tags. You can just write one tag with / as a suffix, like what you see here, br tag. All right, this br tag is not having any opening or closing tags. It is br and / means it is the opening, it is the closing tags both together without having any content. Br tag essentially tells that keep a break here, keep a line here, kind of stuff. You have varieties of elements. There is something called a block element in HTML. If you see any block element, it actually starts in a new line, unlike an inline element. An inline element is the element that just sticks to the same line where you are writing. Whereas block element adds a new line before it and a new line after the element. You'll see examples for them shortly. Here I'm just only dumping the vocabulary. So now you know what is a HTML element, what is opening tag, what is closing tag, what is a unary element, what is a block element, and what is an inline element. Inline element do not add any lines either before or after the elements, whereas block elements add a new line both before the element as well as after the element. Sometimes, or not sometimes, in fact, in many places, a HTML element may also have attributes. For example, here you see, I am having an element whose opening tag is A and closing tag is /A, and the content is home. The content is home. But in the opening tag after A, you also have something called href equal to home.html. This entire thing is called as an attribute. Href is an attribute of the A tag or anchor element. These attributes they may have some values. Many times attributes carry some value. Then attribute name and the value are separated by that equal symbol. And the value must always be enclosed within quotes. It can be single quotes or double quotes. Try to use double quotes. You need to stick to some kind of a convention. Better to just go with the double quotes. HTML is not a new thing, right? You all know HTML, or many of you are aware of HTML. You may be writing some HTML documents already. But there are some HTML elements which are now deprecated. Now, in the sense, since 2005 version. Some of them like the bold tag B or italics tag I or central justification center. These kind of tags are deprecated. These are all presentational elements, so they are all deprecated. The job is now delegated to the CSS to take care. So avoid using this B tag, I tag, center tag, and etc. Right? So that is brief about HTML elements. Remember, HTML elements may contain other elements as well. When you look at a HTML element which contains children and it contains again children and children and children, in fact, that forms an inverted nested tree structure. Make sure that they are well balanced. In the sense, everywhere you have an opening tag, you need to have a closing tag somewhere appropriately, in which again you have any element, it should also have opening and closing tags balanced. If you just follow this practice recursively, the tree structure becomes, or the HTML document becomes very much well balanced. You may use different editors and they'll help you out in that, but make sure you know that fact. Okay, so this is about HTML elements. Now let us look at what do we write in the head section, HTML head section. We'll see good examples a little later, but let's cover these basic things first. We have seen in the previous slide that HTML is the root element, in which head is the first element and the body is the second element of the HTML, right? So now let us look at the first element, that is head element. So title is one of the elements that you often find in the head, and that defines the title of the document. That defines the title of the document. Whenever you open a browser, on the tab, you'll see some title regarding the page that you're opening, right? So that is what you define as part of the title tag. So here is an example. Title is the opening tag, / title is the closing tag. And what you're writing as the content, a review of HTML fundamentals. When you place this in the head section, your HTML document on the browser will display this particular review of HTML fundamentals on the tab of the browser. Tab or title bar, we actually call it as title bar of the browser if you do not have any tabs, or if you are having multiple tabs, each tab will have its own title bar, and that's where it gets displayed. Remember, there is something called search engine optimization. So you know Google search engines and other things, right? They search for content. So they search for the content based on many factors, and one of the factors is, of course, the title of the document. So for SEOs to search your document properly and to get your document to be listed in the search results as prominently as possible, you need to be very careful about writing the appropriate title. If you just say home as a title, it's a very generic thing. If you write something like specifically like review of HTML fundamentals, then it gives you a little more clues about what kind of document it is. So search engines will actually spend some time on this document if they are looking for something related to HTML. The other important tag of HTML is meta. And these elements, there can be any number of meta elements. Title is only one, whereas meta elements can be anything, any number. And they provide some machine parsable data. In the sense, the machine, the browser, that is the one which parses this to gain some insights into the document. And it is not meant for any display or anything like that. It's not meant for display. For example, you see the first meta tag is defining something like viewport. So what sort of viewport I am using, what kind of display device I am using. And the name is viewport, the meta name is viewport. What is the content? It is saying some details over there. The kind of meta names and their corresponding contents, these are all, you see them time to time, they keep growing in number. For example, in case of viewport, here we are saying like the width of this viewport must be whatever is the device width. And initial scale is just 1, means no zoom in, no zoom out. Make it as a habit. You will understand about these things more maybe at a later point of time. But for now, make it as a habit to have this viewport with this kind of a content in your HTML head sections always, until unless you have a reason to not to use that. Similarly, you may have some keywords like what this document is all about, let's say. So you may have some keywords. Here the content is comma separated list of keywords. What is a character set? You have that Unicode that is 8. And who is the author of this document? Some name. So you can even have your own custom meta elements also. There is nothing like HTML defines everything. Right, so this is about meta section. Many people who start with HTML do not actually spend time on this area. Make sure since the beginning, you always write the HTML documents with appropriate title and appropriate meta tags as well, meta elements as well. Your document becomes worthy enough. And another thing that you typically come across, the head section of HTML documents include link, script, style, and etc. The link element is to specify the relation to an external resource. Most likely it is, in most of the cases, that external resource may be a style sheet. When we talk about CSS, we'll spend time on this particular element. Similarly, when you're trying to add behavior, you need to add some scripts. So for which you'll be using script element. Sometimes you may be using inline styling. In such a case, you may be using that style element and etc. All right. So in summary, the head section of the HTML document, in many cases, you'll be seeing or you'll be writing title element. We suggest you to write meta elements also. And as needed, you may be also using link element, script element, and style elements. This is head section. What do you see in the body section? You will be writing a lot of content. The body may contain text, may contain multimedia, may contain pictures like audio, video, and etc. May contain various interactive forms. For everything, you'll have one or other tag. There are lots of tags, in fact. We are not going to cover all the tags. This is just only a quick review. So once you go through this, you know that, oh, some of the tags we have seen here. So let's Google and figure out all the other tags, or you go to the specification and learn about maybe other major tags as and when you need them. You don't read dictionary from A to Z, right? You know basic vocabulary. After that, as and when you need, you refer to the dictionary. Same thing here. We'll be covering some of the tags which are day-to-day tags that are useful day-to-day, but that is not an exhaustive list. So you will definitely be referring to the other tags as and when you require them. So one of the most important set of the tags that are very commonly used are like header tags, heading tags, not header, sorry, heading tags. There are 6 heading tags, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. These elements mark headings. H1 is the most significant, that heading appears in largest size possible. And H6 is the heading that appears in the smallest font that is possible as a heading. So the main heading you'll be using H1, then you will use H2 subheading, and a subsection you'll be using H3, and so on. So H1 is for most significant headings and H6 is the least significant headings. And as expected, the heading elements are block elements, means they add a new line before the heading and a new line after the heading. Another interesting element is P, or that is a paragraph element. You know a paragraph, right? When you want to write a lot of text as a paragraph, you write all the text within the P tags. That means you write opening tag of P, write the entire paragraph, and you close it with the closing tag of P. HTML documents, you see hypertext markup language, right? What is that hypertext really? It appears like a text only, but it is having something more than a text. That is why we call them as hypertext. For example, you see many times you see links, right? HTML links. When you click on that link, it opens another page. So how do you keep those links within your HTML pages? You use the anchor tag. You see, anchor tag, A tag essentially. There are several varieties of anchor tags. Mostly used anchor tags are either to connect to another web page or to send an email and etc. So if you want to, from your document, if you want to connect to some other document, you will be using that first example syntax. You write anchor tag href, right? Reference essentially, hypertext reference is equal to, this is an attribute of anchor tag, right? So you'll have name of the attribute is href and value is home.html. And that is in the double quotes, remember. So home.html is another document which you should be able to access, the browser should be able to access from the current location. So you'll be giving a relative location or an absolute path over there. And the link, okay, finally the link appears as an underscore on a text, right? So the text is here is home. So when you run this HTML document or when you render this HTML document, you see home as a text appearing on the screen with an underscore. When you click on that home, it will open the content of the home.html. Sometimes you may want to give links for opening an email client. Then you will be using this mail to, the href with mail to. You give the email ID, whichever is the default mail client on your machine on which this particular document is being opened. That mail client will automatically open a new mail window with this as the to address. Again, if you haven't seen it, don't bother much about it for now. But remember that there is something called anchor tag. Href is its attribute. Value can be a URL of another HTML document, or it can even be some link to their emails and etc. BR or break, HR or horizontal ruler. These are other tags which are again what do we call the block elements. BR just adds break, means it adds a new line, whereas HR also adds a new line along with a line that you can see. It will be just giving a black color line by default unless you have some kind of styling on top of it. If you want to show some multimedia content like an image, you'll be using the element called img, which stands for image. And the most important attribute of img is src, that is source of the image. Again, you need to give a relative path or an absolute path to your image file. In this case, it is logo.png. There is no path associated here. Means wherever you have this HTML document placed, in the same location, you have the logo.png also available. And sometimes what happens is that the image may not appear immediately, or it may not even appear because of whatever reasons. Maybe it is not found or something. In such a case, you want to, in that area where the image is supposed to be displayed, it will at least display some kind of an alternate text. That is what you write using the attribute called alt. So here we are calling logo. So either logo picture appears or logo as text appears there. And that area is basically you are saying width is 100 and height is 100. So you are giving them the measurements of that area. Similarly, other multimedia elements like audio, video also can be embedded here. A simple example here is for audio. You have lots of attributes. When the attributes do not have any values, or you just want to go with the default values, you can just write attribute name. You need not write a value at all. For example, here controls, loop, autoplay, and muted. These are all attributes of audio tag, but they are all for default values. So controls means you want to show the audio controls on the screen. Loop, you want to run that audio in a loop. Autoplay, the moment it appears, it should automatically start playing. Muted, maybe initially you want to just keep it in mute. That's what you said in the audio tag. But where are those audio files? Within the audio tag, you'll be writing any number of source tags, Each source tag will have source file or source attribute. For example, here I am having a couple of MP3 files, first file and other file, something like that. And you can even specify what kind of file it is. You may say audio MPEG, right? Maybe that is the kind of file you want to run here, or that is the kind of audio that you want to run over here. Right, so summary is that body section contains text within paragraphs and headings in H1 to H6 varieties of tags. You may have hyperlinks with anchor tags. You may have breaks and horizontal rulers in between. You can embed images. You can embed other multimedia to make it interesting. As I mentioned, there are several more tags that you can use in the body tag. As and when you start developing something on your own, go and refer and figure out which tags are useful for you. But these tags that we cover here are the basic things. You definitely will be using these tags to develop anything useful. Okay, a couple of more actually. I thought we are done with the HTML body section, but we are still having a few more. So many times you may be having a list of some data you want to show as a list in the HTML document. For example, you want to list the number of places or different places and etc. Right? So that's where you'll be using these tags like UL and OL. The list of elements, if you want to render, you'll be using either UL element or OL element along with LI elements. UL is meant for displaying unordered elements, means you'll not be giving any what you call indexing like 1, 2, 3. You will not be giving anything. You just list them. So UL is the element in which you can have any number of LI elements. For example, here I have apples and oranges. Maybe it is list of fruits. There is no ordering here. I will not be saying like 1 is apple, 2 is orange, nothing like that. It is just prints apples and oranges. Instead, if you want to display them along with an index, then you will have to use ordered list, OL. And you can also specify what kind of index you want to use. You can use numerical indices like 1, 2, 3, Roman 1, 2, 3, or you can use alphabet indices like capital or uppercase ABC or lowercase ABC and etc. So you can specify them. Start with from where and what kind of index you want to use. Sometimes you may also specify that you reverse them. It's not that you always reverse them, but if it is an interesting feature. All right. Lists can also contain lists. Look at the fourth bullet here. I have an ordered list in which I have 3 elements: fruits, vegetables, and nuts. And fruits is containing are that particular LI element, that is list item, right? LI stands for list item. So that fruits item contains an unordered list in which you have apples and oranges. Even though for the brevity purpose, we have written that entire LI tag in just one line, your editors definitely suggest you, even if they are not suggesting, make sure that you write them as proper structure, like one line at a time, so that it is much readable rather than just writing as one single line here. Similarly, tables is another way of structuring. We say, right, HTML is for structuring the content, we are saying, right? These are the various structures. List is one structure and the table is another structure. If you want to have a table, tabulated data, you use table element. Every table will have some header, that is t-head tag. Similarly, footer, that is where you will be having t-foot tag. And you can have rows. Anywhere you can have rows. TR stands for table row. So head can have, typically heads have 1 row. You may have any number of rows, of course. And body also can have any number of rows. Footer, again, you can have rows. Everything you write in a table actually come under row elements, in which you will be having either TH or TD. If it is under header, it will be TH element. All right, you will have table in which you have header, in which you have a row. In the row, you have different columns, right? Each column will be one TH element. So here you have 2 columns. State is first column, capitals is second column. Similarly, the body also will be having number of rows. Each row must have the same number of columns. Otherwise, they will be merged or whatever if you do them. Otherwise, typically a standard table will have same number of columns like you see in the header. So for example, here, Karnataka is the state and Bengaluru is the capital, and so on. Towards the end, you can also have the footer in which you'll again have TR, in which you can have TD elements. You see here something interesting. There is only one TD element within the footer. We are supposed to have two TD elements because our header is having actually two columns. So better to have, supposed to have two columns in the footer also. But you do not have any info. In fact, you want to merge both of them and want to write something. How do you merge? You span the columns. If you want to span the columns horizontally, if you want to merge, you go for col span. If you want to merge vertically, you go for row spanning. Here I am using col span as an attribute. Number of columns you want to merge. So it is the first TD element, and we are saying merge to, means first and second TD element, both the columns will be merged together. And here we are saying refer to Wikipedia for full list, something like that. All right, so this is about table. Make sure you use tables only for presenting the tabulated data. You are using the tables only for presenting the tabulated data. Do not use it for layouts. If you want to have a layout on your web page where you want to have some elements on the left section, right section, something like that, do not use table for such kind of arrangements. People used to use tables for that purpose in the past. Now you use CSS for that purpose. HTML is only meant for content. Use table for tabulated content. That's it. Okay. And you can also have the interactive forms we said, right? So the forms may look something like this. Don't worry too much about this for now. But when you do an exercise, we can understand much better about them. So the form may contain, what is a form? It will contain typically some kind of like text fields and etc. so that you can enter some data, click buttons, select some drop-down elements and etc. You may be having labels also for them, otherwise you do not know what to enter, right? So that way a form element may contain labels, input elements and so on. You can see that there are varieties of input elements like radio elements, submit elements and etc. in the type section, right? So some of the popular elements include these kind of text elements, buttons, checkboxes, radio buttons. Checkboxes are like you can tick any number of them in a form, whereas radio buttons are like you can tick only one of the radio buttons within the given group. For example, gender, male or female. So you select only one of them, right? So there you will be using radio buttons. That is the input element you'll be using. Submit button or file dialog button and etc. And these are all one variety of input elements. Plus you will have text area element, a button element on its own, select element for drop downs and etc. When you have a form, finally you will once you enter the data, you click on submit button, right? And that form data gets submitted to whom? Typically to a server, right? Server is the one which is expecting this data. But sometimes the data may be submitted to a script that is running on the browser itself. Either client-side script or server-side script receives this content once you submit these forms. Once when we go through both server as well as currently we are looking at only front-end development, right? So we'll be most worried about submitting the forms to the local script and how do we actually handle that, or we submit the form to the server, and when we look at the server development, we'll see how we capture this data and process this data. There are some elements which we call as semantic elements. These are all little new entrants, not anymore, but comparatively, relatively new entrants when you compare it with the other elements that we have seen. So you have these semantic elements mainly meant for layout. Again, this layout is not from the presentational purpose, rather again from the markup only. Apart from these layout elements, you need to add styling to actually lay out the entire structure. So some of the semantic elements are like header, nav, navigation, section, aside, footer, article, main. You can see what actually they mean on the screen itself. And the non-semantic elements that we often see in the HTML documents are span and div. Span is an inline element and a div is a block element. Within span element, you can write anything. Within div element, you can write anything. These are all basically to reserve some space. If you are reserving some space within the same line, you go for span. If you want to reserve the space in the next line, then you go for div element. That's why they are inline and block elements. Typically, the span and div elements come along with CSS to decorate or to present the contents of those elements. In fact, once you gain command on span and div elements, you can write better and powerful HTML documents. So a couple of, there are few illustrations here. Those illustrations, we go through them maybe in the next session.